multiple stressor. What do I mean by this? You find that in livelihoods, for example, people are already marginalized. If you take Africa, for example, the face of poverty often means multiple deprivation. It is the face of lack of education, hunger, lack of basic services, and coupled with this, we found out that in the urban areas, the poor are going to be harder hit. Africa has lots of slums, and within these slum areas, they do not have the proper facilities. Then you add on the impact of climate change or extreme events, and people become more vulnerable, sinking deeper into poverty and unable to come out of the poverty traps.
A large part of the developing world lives in rural areas, and they are connected in some way or the other with agriculture. Now, with growing scarcity of water, for instance, and decreasing yields with agricultural crops, you would find a number of farmers who are largely dependent on rain-fed agriculture and produce just about enough food to take care of their own needs will be severely disadvantaged. So I think that certainly will lead to conflict, because where would these people go? You would have climate refugees, and this would be multiplied even further by those in low-lying coastal areas and in the small island states. Because if they are threatened in their very existence, there would clearly be a large number of environmental or climate refugees. And therefore, all of this has the potential for exacerbation of those factors that are leading to conflict even today.
Economists have compared the task of lowering the world's economy's carbon footprint now, the equivalent of about 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide per year, to turning a cruise ship. But the report says the ship is firing full steam ahead. Emissions in the first decade of this century were higher than the previous 3 decades. The main contributors to emission growth were growing energy demand and an increase of the share of coal in the global fuel mix.
What comes out very clearly from this report is the fact that the high-speed mitigation train would need to leave the station soon, and all of global society would have to get on board. So there is, if we really want to bring about a limitation of temperature increase to no more than 2 degrees Celsius, then this is the message that comes out very clearly from this report.
From 2000 to 2010, world economies became more efficient in their use of energy. That efficiency would have reduced global emissions by the equivalent of 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide over that time period, except that population grew steadily and energy use became more carbon intensive. The net result was an equivalent of 7 billion more tons of emissions in that decade than during the previous one.
When we did the fourth assessment report, we didn't have quite as much material available on these projections. But what you see today is profound. You know, we're living in a world where population is increasing very rapidly, and who knows at what level it will stabilize, 9 billion, 10 billion. And at the same time, we're facing the specter of reduced yields in some of the key crops that feed humanity. So, you know, this is just an example of the kind of new knowledge and new evidence that we're able to provide. And this is also true of, you know, what you find, for instance, with respect to species.
The report includes a variety of pathways to a more stable climate system by the year 2100. These include aggressive paths that give the planet a shot to stay under an additional 2 degrees Celsius of warming, roughly equivalent to a carbon dioxide concentration of 450 parts per million. The stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations at low levels requires a fundamental transformation of the energy supply system. The IPCC report identifies 4 key technologies for achieving aggressive emissions reductions goals. These are nuclear power, energy efficiency, biofuels, and biomass energy with carbon capture and storage. The IPCC economic analysis did not include the benefits of cutting greenhouse gas emissions, which could outweigh the costs. The benefits include reducing air pollution, which plagues China and recently hit the United Kingdom, and improved energy security, which is currently at risk in Eastern Europe due to the actions of Russia, a large producer of gas in Ukraine. The new IPCC report warns that carbon emissions have soared in the last decade and are now growing at almost double the previous rate, but its comprehensive analysis from rapid action can still limit global warming to 2 degrees centigrade, the internationally agreed safe limit if low carbon emission triples or quadruples by 2050. Nonetheless, to avoid the worst impacts of climate change at the lowest cost, the report envisages an energy revolution ending centuries of dominance by fossil fuels, which will require significant political and commercial change.
We tend to forget that when you talk about food security, it's not just what grows on land. A large part of humanity also uses nutritional material from the seas, from the oceans. If that's going to be affected, the result of migration from one location to the other has serious implications for food security in different parts of the world. So, I mean, these are just some examples of what we find with much greater certainty, with far greater detail today than was possible 7 years ago. And that's why I said that there is a reason for the world not really neglecting the findings of this report, because they are profound. And let me repeat once again, we have said very categorically in this report the implications for human security. We have reasons to believe that if the world doesn't do anything about mitigating the emissions of greenhouse gases and the extent of climate change continues to increase, then the very social stability of human systems could be at stake.
We have a deep pool of options, we have a deep pool of experience, and I think a deep pool of creativity and innovation that could be applied to comprehensive and effective solutions. This idea that there is a solution space is really important. If climate change is totally unmanageable, what are we going to do? What I think we've been asked to do in the IPCC is analyze from a scientific perspective, what are the things that can be done? What's the map of the space of possible solutions? And what you see in the report is a big emphasis on how adaptation, vulnerability reduction, building resilience can be key parts of this opportunity space. And I think that the adaptation examples, even the two that I showed in the slideshow, are really good examples of unpacking the opportunity space. There are examples all the way from community level investments, protecting coastal habitats, improving coordination and communication among different parts of the community, up to very high level technology solutions with satellite monitoring for severe weather and improved technology for coastal protection, communication, transportation.
Meanwhile, at the Climate Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C. this month, the United Nations Secretary General called on governments to reach a universal legal climate agreement by the year 2015 that is both ambitious and achievable. Ban Ki-moon stressed the need for both political and financial investment to deal with climate change, the single greatest threat to a sustainable future.
This climate change is a defining issue of our times and existential threat to our life and development. We have to address this issue immediately. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in its most recent report, has made it quite clear that the climate change is happening and approaching much, much faster than one may expect.
The Secretary General underlined that the United Nations, the World Bank, and the IMF have worked together to address this issue with the full support and engagement of the United Nations member states. He stressed that he's going to convene a summit meeting on climate change on September the 23rd.
We have two basic purposes. One is raise political will. I urge political leaders of the world to prioritize their resources and their political energy on climate change. Second, catalyze actions on the ground. I'm inviting world leaders, business leaders, and civil society leaders to address these issues.
Taking action now will not only solve the problem of protecting the planet, but it will be a tremendous boost for economies. We know that climate change will threaten economic growth, especially in the poorest countries, but everywhere as well. It's